Hello and welcome to the course Introduction to Advanced Cognitive Processes. I am Ark Verma from IIT Kanpur, and we have been talking about language in the past lectures. We have talked in the last two lectures about aspects of language acquisition. Today I am going to take the discussion towards comprehension of language. See, in the beginning we talked about what is language, what are the salient characteristics of language, and we also saw in the last lectures about how does a child acquire various different aspects of language. And we appreciated that a child starts his journey with appreciating what are speech sounds as opposed to non-speech sounds, and we talked about how does a child figure out segmenting this continuous stream of speech into words and then connecting words to meaning, and eventually mastering the other aspects of language like syntax and rules and those kind of things. Today I'm trying to give you a brief introduction into how the child, or not even a child, how adults might be making meaning out of stuff. Say for example, what are the critical aspects of understanding language? And what I'm trying to do here is I'll try and divide this section into two parts. I'll first talk about words in today's lecture. I'll try and take you to sentences and larger text in a different lecture. So let us begin with talking a little bit about words. Now, if you remember, again taking you back to the first lecture on language, we defined language earlier as a system of symbols and rules. In today's lecture, our attempt will be to talk about these symbols. So what is a symbol? What does a symbol really signify? A symbol is something that represents or refers to something while not really having a meaning of its own. Suppose I could say that the word apple refers to the red fruit called apple, which is sweet in nature, which is found in places like Shimla or California or some place like that. But the sound apple in itself does not really have any meaning. So it is a major task for somebody who wants to comprehend or understand language to be able to link between apple, that is the form of this word, the sound of this word or the written aspect of this word, to the meaning which is the fruit itself and the various connections you might have with relation to the fruit. You might remember that it is sweet, you might remember that it is edible, and those kind of things. So symbols in a particular language are referred to as words, and I'm again talking both about written words and spoken words, but you will see me really shifting from written to spoken word form, because generally I'm just talking about language at the moment. I'm not really talking about only speech, or I'm not really talking about only written word form. So we will try and understand in this lecture about how people use words. Now this is again cartoon strip I came across during the on the internet, and sometimes people come across with these kind of things. It is difficult to describe in words. A lot of times you will wonder that this is something I want to talk about, but I'm finding it slightly difficult to describe this feeling or this emotion in words. The point is, that is exactly what words are supposed to do, isn't it? I mean, words are supposed to describe phenomena and events and objects and so on and so forth, and they do it in a pretty interesting way. Suppose, I mean, if you look at the examples I'm putting up here, copyright to John Atkinson from this Wrong Hands, but the idea is, if you see, I mean, we are using objects here and describing them using these set of words. Typically you would probably refer to the comb as a comb itself, but you can also choose to describe it in other words, and that is pretty much what the function of words is. The function is to describe or to in some sense denote the physical object or an event that is happening in a symbolic form. So all of the words that you will come up with are symbols for what is actually happening, and as a comprehender, as somebody who wants to understand a particular language, what you have to do is connect this symbol to the actual physical object or the actual physical event that is taking place. So again, these are some of the examples I kind of picked up and brought in here for you to see. Let us now move on to how do people talk about words. How do you academically approach the concept of understanding words? So when you talk about words or symbols for that matter, there are two things that you would want to appreciate. First is the form of the symbol, or let us say the form of the word. And when I'm taking word, I can talk about two things here. I can talk about how the word sounds, that is the sound form or the phonological or the phonetic form, and I can talk about nowadays, because you write almost everything, so you can talk about the orthographic form or the visual form. So there is the phonological form, sound based form, there is the orthographic form, there is the visual form, And the other important aspect is, other than form, you also need to connect the form with some meaning. So you'd want to know how is it that you're storing the meaning of this word, how is it organized in the brain. And we will talk about these two aspects in the course of this lecture, and I hope by the end of it you kind of make both of these connections and try and understand how word meaning is understood. So let us begin with the form, let us begin with how words are constructed. So when you talk about physical sound based features, then you are actually talking about what is called phonetics. So the idea is you are basically concerned with describing the constituent sounds of the word, because most language is spoken language. I mean, obviously we are writing it nowadays, or we've been writing language for thousands of years now, but the primary form when I'm talking about language is sound. So you have to appreciate the phonetics or the physical features of the sound. What is the energy content, what is what the frequency, where in the vocal tract the sound has been produced from, and those what is the manner of articulation. These are some of the features you would like to talk about when you're talking about the phonetic features of a particular word. This is one aspect. The other aspect is, what are the sounds that the word contains. So now you are coming on the phonemic or the phonological aspect of it. So basically the phonological aspect will tell you how many phonemes a particular word has, and a phoneme is basically the shortest segment of speech, which if you change, it will change the meaning of the word. Let me give you an example. Suppose there is a word called bat. Bat has three phonemes, let us say b, and t, and if you change the first phoneme, if you kind of replace it with k, then you have k, and t, bat becomes cat. The meaning has also changed. So a phoneme is the shortest segment of speech, which if you change it from the beginning of the word or the end of the word, it is bound to change the meaning of that word. So basic sound is if it is replaced. Just a trivia fact that English as a language has around 26 alphabets, and it has around 48 different phonemes, 48 sounds from which the entire English language is actually constructed. So this is one. So phonetic features, phonemic features, those are the other things. Also when you're talking about how words are constructed, then you would be actually talking a little bit about morphemes, or this field which studies morphemes or different kinds of morphemes called morphology. Now what is a morpheme? Morpheme is basically the smallest grammatical unit in a particular language. Suppose, say for example, there is a word called player, and you can see the example here in the slide. Play and er, these are the two units. So play is referred to as a free morpheme or a lexical morpheme, and these things have an entire meaning of their own. They can be used as they are, and they can be used as independent words. On the other hand, you might have affixes like er, ed, s, nes, and those kind of things. These things, if they are attached to particular words, also have an impact on the meaning of these particular words. They can turn them into past tense, they can turn them into plurals, passives, so on and so forth. But these things basically more or less have a grammatical function. Suppose if the word is player and I'm adding er to the word play here, er is basically telling me that I am not talking about the act of play anymore, I am talking about the person who plays the game. So it's performing a grammatical function. That is why it is referred to as a grammatical morpheme. It is also referred to as a bound morpheme for the reason that if you just look at er independently, it does not have a meaning of its own. It does not really stand alone on its own in the entire language. However, it changes the meaning of the word to which it is added to. So that is why it needs to be bound to something, to be of to be something of an entity for that matter. So you have in morphemes, you have free morphemes, words like play, sleep, and those kind of things, and you have bound morphemes, which are words like er and y, for example, if you add to sleepy, if you are making those kind of things. So those are bound morphemes. The first is free morphemes, then yes, bound morphemes. So we talked about phonetics, we talked about phonology in terms of phonemes, and we are not talking about morphemes and morphology. Now, before I move further, let me just describe some of the very typical effects people have come across who've researched with word perception, word production, etc. One of the very interesting effects happens at the phonemic level is, suppose you are talking on a disturbed phone line. A lot of times you will see, if during the conversation there are parts of the signal that are missing, parts of what the other person is saying and you could not hear, a lot of times your mind kind of fills up that gap. Okay, so there was this experiment done by war in 1970, and basically the idea was to present participants with a conversation on the phones in some sense, and at a critical part. So for example, if the sentence is met with their respective legislatures, just at the point where the S has to be there, they induce the cuffing sound. So when the cuffing sound comes, the participant does not really hear the S. So the participant is hearing met with the legi and the cuffing sound and later. So he's not really heard the S. But then later, participants were asked what did they hear, and most of the participants, 90% of the participants probably mentioned, and they said that they heard the S sound, even though the S sound was actually never really even presented. So the idea is that a lot of times, because we know the meaning of the word, because we have already predicted what word they will be, what we do is we fill up these missing parts of the signal. This effect is basically called the phonemic restoration effect. So the phonemic restoration effect is basically, because you know the meaning of the word, you are filling in the missing phonemes, and this filling in of the missing phonemes is also referred to as a top-down effect in perception. It is a top-down effect because your brain or your mind already knows the meaning, and it is trying to intervene in the basic procedure, in the basic incoming source of information, just by supplying what aspects are kind of if the signal is shoddy, if the network is not very clear, then because you already know the signal, it's like because you already know the alley and somebody is trying to tell you the path to reach somewhere, because if you know the location a little bit, sometimes you can also pitch in, okay, this is the thing I know already. So this is a little bit of what our perceptual system does. Also, this is helped a lot by context as well. So in a particular context, sometimes you are aware of what the conversation is going to be about. The next important effect is a bit similar to what I was already talking about, is referred to as the word superiority effect. It was demonstrated by Riker in 1969, and Riker actually showed that if you want to give participants a task of recognizing letters or memorizing letters, and if you can present these letters in one of three forms. First is, if you see the figure A here, again the figure is borrowed from Goldstein's book. The figure A here, the idea was you had to ask participants whether a particular letter was there. Suppose the R was there or not. First part is when the letter R is embedded in a word. The second form is the letter K is presented in an isolated fashion. And the third presentation is when it is embedded in a non-word kind of a fashion, just a string of letters, and you have to remember a particular letter. It was seen that letters were remembered much better, letters were easier to remember if they were contained in a word as opposed to contained in a non-word scenario or just presented in an isolated fashion. So this is a word superiority effect. This is again a context based effects in some sense, because if you kind of remember the word, and words are slightly easier to remember than non-words or letter strings, because you kind of just remember that fork was the word that was presented, you will be able to remember that FORK, all of those 4 letters were there. If you just kind of present a thing like this, RFOK, then basically because it does not really have a meaning, you will have to remember each of these letters separately, and that is a cognitively more demanding task. So your performance will anyways suffer here. So these are the 2 effects. The other effect also is in terms of understanding words or perception of words is what is referred to as the frequency effects. Now the frequency effect basically says that whatever dependent measure you are getting, reaction time or fixation duration or those kind of things, for words that are high occurring in frequency, the words that occur with high frequency are remembered are responded to faster as compared to words that are occurring in less frequency. The idea is frequency basically is the number of times a particular word occurs. If you take a sample of, let us say, 1 million words from the entire spoken language or written language or wherever. Now if a word is occurring, let us say 5,000 times or 10,000 times or 20,000 times in this 1 million corpus, it is very likely that you have come across with this word so many more times as compared to if a word is appearing only for 100 times or 200 times or 300 times. So the idea is the words which you have encountered more, you will react to them faster in terms of making decisions about semanticity, making decisions about whether it's a word or non-word, even making sound or other kind of decisions. So this is referred to as the word frequency effect, and again this is a very robust effect, and it is there for people to see across so many different languages. Now, the final effect I wanted to talk to you about is called the lexical ambiguity effect. Now, lexical ambiguity is something, and this is again an experiment which was done some time back. This was done by Sweeney in 1979, and the lexical ambiguity stuff is something like, you know, that sometimes a particular word does not mean just one single thing. It might mean a couple of things or 3 things or 4 things, and depending upon the context, you will make out what is basically being referred to. Suppose if I am talking to, if I am giving a sentence that X went to the bank for lunch. Now, if there is a river nearby, you will probably imagine that I have gone to a river bank for lunch, not really a bank which is a monetary institution. But suppose I am a bank employee and I am saying he has gone to the bank for lunch, then you might think, okay, maybe he has gone to his office for lunch, maybe there is a party there or something like that. So, Sweeney did this experiment. He presented the participant with this sentence. I am just going to read it out for you now. So, the sentence was, rumor had it that for years the government building had been plagued with problems. The man was not surprised when he found several spiders, roaches and other bugs in the corner of the room. Now, again, there are 2 kinds of contexts here. One context is that we are talking about a government building, and the other context is more local because I am talking about spiders and roaches and other things. Now, the word bug might mean either an insect, which is more congruent to this local effect, or it might mean, in terms of a government building, something, a device that kind of is used to tap information illegally. Now, when the participants were hearing this in a headphone, they were being presented with a lexical decision kind of a task, and in this task they had to actually respond to words that were coming. And those words could be either either related to insects or something, or related to spy utilities or something, or just unrelated. And it was seen that while they were hearing this, their reaction times to ants etc. was much faster because the local context is congruent, and their reaction time to with spy or spy utilities was also slightly better because again you are talking about a government building and that context is there. But the reaction time was unaffected, were slightly larger when you talk about unrelated things like sky. So, this is called the lexical ambiguity kind of an effect. Okay. So, a lot of times a single word might mean multiple things, but the context might help you resolve the meaning. We might talk about this at some point later in the lecture as well. So, these were some of the basic effects you will come across across a different range of studies when you talk about people really trying to understand words. Let us now kind of move towards recognizing words. Let us see how this is done. Now, the act of recognizing words is basically you have to access a representation of that word in your head. Okay, and this representation, accessing of this representation in your head is referred to as lexical access. Now, again, lexical access is not really complete meaning making. Lexical access is reaching the point where you reach the representation of the word, be it visual or be it auditory, and after that only meaning will be generated. So, when I am talking about lexical access, let me define this for you. Most models of lexical access do not actually deal with activation of meaning, rather they deal with activation of form. It is assumed that you have a mental dictionary. Mental dictionary is referred to as the mental lexicon, and the mental lexicon is storing representations of words. Now, if it is the auditory lexicon, it is storing auditory representations. If it is a visual lexicon, it is representing the visual features of the word. Now, what happens is whenever somebody is speaking that word in the auditory domain, the auditory lexicon, the representation of that word in the auditory lexicon will be activated. If you are reading that word, somebody is showing you the written form of that word, then the representation in the visual lexicon will be activated. And only after this you will be able to recognize this word which is spoken or shown to you, and you will understand the meaning and so on and so forth. This aspect is called lexical access. Let me just define this to you again. Lexical access refers to the set of mental representations and processes that are involved in identifying which specific words we are seeing or hearing. Also, models of lexical access, as I said again, mostly deal with just the activation of meaning and not with the activation of form or anything else. So let us move ahead with this understanding. Now lexical access is something which is very fast, it is effortless, you don't really decide to activate a word or something, it just when you see a word or hear a word, lexical access is already achieved. It is very fast, it is effortless, and it is almost automatic, unstoppable kind of a thing. Also, William Marsden and Wilson actually showed this in one of the experiments, and they employed a shadowing task, and the shadowing task was that the participants were hearing something, hearing the recorded speech, and they had to repeat it just after the recorded speech. Now, I'll talk to you about production in some time, but the idea is if you have to repeat something, if you have to produce something, this has to start from the top, from the lexical access part. So, the idea is if people are able to repeat it, they must be going through the lexical access, and with this assumption they showed that fast shadowers, people who could very quickly repeat this, did this repetition with as quickly as 250 milliseconds. So, lexical access is something that is happening very quickly, it is happening around 250 milliseconds, which is just 1/4 of a second for a word. Also, it showed that people were very good at gaining this information, because there were only 3 errors which were actually major errors, but for the most part there were very little errors in this kind of a task. So this is there, and let us now visit couple of models of lexical access. So one of the models I'll talk about is the trace model. Trace model is basically a model of visual lexical access, reaching out to visual word forms. Now trace model, I'll quickly show it to you in a moment. It has basically 3 levels. It has a feature level, it has a letter level, and it has a word level. Now at the feature level, and there are connections between these different units. So it has basically connections between processing units that allow units within the same level to affect each other. I'll show you about all of these things in a while. It also allows processing at a higher level of the system to impact the lower level of the system. If you remember, we're talking about word superiority effect or phonemic restoration effect. So there is a scope of top down influence from that. Suppose I'm reading a word, as soon as I've just read half the word, because I know the meaning, I'll kind of fill it up and I'll say the task is done. These are the kind of things that will help me achieve a very fast pace of reading. We'll see how this model really works. And the connections between these 3 levels, which I am saying, the feature level, the letter level, and the word level, are can be either excitatory or inhibitory. So it might be that input coming at one level might excite representations at the next level, or they might inhibit representations at the next level. So this is how the model really looks. If you look at the bottom, you will see that these are features: horizontal lines, slanted lines, vertical lines. Then you will see in the letter level there are letters which are made up of these features. So you will see if there is a word, if there is a letter called T, T is basically linked favorably by a horizontal segment and a vertical segment. N is basically linked positively by 2 vertical segments and 1 slanted segment. And similarly, you will see from the letter level the activations go upwards, and then there are words which have either A or N or T, and if there are words like A and N, they will actually activate only those words where A and N are both present. Suppose there is a word like banana, so then A and N will both activate those. They will try and unactivate or inhibit other words that do not contain both of these letters. So this is one way where competition is kind of playing out. So again, you can look at this again, and the model of the trace model is freely available for you to look at. Now this is how the processing really works. So you have the visual input, or you might have the acoustic input. Now from the visual input level, I'm just talking, the input goes to the feature level input goes to letter level goes to word level. You will see there is no feedback from the letter level, from the feature level downwards, but the idea is that there is this interaction between the word level and letter level and feature level. Similarly, if there is acoustic input, you will see that there is acoustic features, phonetics, phonemes, those kind of things, then you have acoustic features, then you have phonemic features, and then you have word level features. This is how the activation of words will actually happen. Let us talk a little bit more in detail about these things. Now the most basic unit of analysis in the trace model is the visual features, the visual lines, slanted lines, horizontal lines, vertical lines. Or if you're talking about auditory, then there's acoustic levels. Now visual features are connected to letter representations the bottom level is connected to the second, there's a letter level, and then connections between letters and features are excitatory, but letters do not feed back to features. So letters level does not really rule out the features, because all the features need to be present. Using a mode of activation called cascaded activation. What is cascaded activation? Cascaded activation is if there is activation received at a lower level, then it will automatically start activation in the upper level and in the upper level. It does not really wait for the process to be completed at this level and only then the activation will go. So cascaded activation, any activation that begins, any input that is coming in will already activate the above levels as well. So the letter level becomes active very soon after activation at the feature level, and so on the word level also get activated. So individual features, again I'm just describing this whole thing to you. So individual features are connected to sometimes more than one letter. You saw the slanted lines are connected to A and N for that matter. The horizontal and vertical lines are connected to G and T and so on and so forth. Now within a layer of units, within the feature level or within the letter units, there will be things like, it will be representing letters of all the connections, and some of these connections will be inhibitory in nature as well. So when a letter processing unit starts to get activated because of the incoming input, it will try to decrease the activation of other letters. So in the same level, one letter is getting activated, so A is getting activated. At the same time, A is trying to deactivate G, because this is the competition that is happening. This competition here is referred to as lateral inhibition. Now there are 26 letters, not all should get activated. So as soon as the evidence for one of the letters starts increasing, the evidence for the rest 25 starts decreasing. That is how A will actually win up, and it will go up and it will be recognized as one of the constituents of the word that you're reading. Second cycle, second letter will go, third cycle, third letter will go, and this is how the recognition of the word will happen. Similarly for phonemics as well. One sound gets activated, then the other sound gets activated, and so on and so forth. Now letters have excitatory connections to the words, because letter will look for whatever words are constituted by them, and they are components of, and they inhibit other words that they are not consonants and they are not part of. So if the letter A is there, it will activate all the letters that contain A, but it will at the same time try and inhibit all the words that do not contain A. Suppose there is a word called fry and there is a word called fram, and A is getting activated. A will activate fram and similar words a bit more, but A will try and deactivate words like fry or fly and others because it does not contain A. Letters also have excitatory and inhibitory feedback connections from the word level. So once, suppose for example, I am talking about a festival and some frying has to be done, and whenever I see the word fram as fr is there, I am kind of expecting that fram is supposed to be there. I will automatically kind of boost the activations for A because I am expecting that word to be there, and try and take away the activation from the another word like fry or something, because the idea is I am also trying to have this top down influence on selecting the words. Both of these, the combination of both of these processes is basically what is going to make my access faster. So this is something, and this basically this is the property which I was already referring to, will help users deal with some kind of degraded input. Suppose you're trying to read something, the ink is spilled, you cannot read the entire thing, but if you can read the beginning and if you can read the end, a lot of times you will be able to fill up the middle part, just like the experiment in legislatures. So that is one of the aspects. Now trace, using the same property, can explain what is referred to as the word superiority effect. Letters are recognized better when embedded in words and not when presented in an isolated fashion. It proposes that activation from the word level strengthens the activation at the letter level representations via excitatory feedback. So as soon as you have received almost half of the word but something is missing, you will kind of get a feedback from the word level to the letter level, which will kind of help you select the correct input representation, and in that sense the word superiority effect will be there because you already know what was the word. So this is again one of the things that the trace model explains. Now let me take you towards the model of spoken recognition, speech recognition. Let us talk about lexical access for spoken words. Now the lexical access of spoken words as in the cohort model is referred to as involving three processes. First is the activation phase, second is the selection phase, and the third is the integration phase. So let us talk about these phases now. What happens during the activation phase? Now when you are hearing words in your environment, when somebody is speaking something or you're listening to the TV or radio or somewhere else, multiple word form representations will get activated. Suppose I am saying ka can activate cow, cat, king, any kind of things, so multiple representations will get activated. This activation is referred to as autonomous process. As soon as I say ka, everything that starts with ka will get activated. Now imagine there are so many words that start with the sound ka, and now your task is basically to be able to just select the correct ka or the correct thing that I am going to speak from this whole thing. So you have to move to the next phase. What is the next phase? The next phase is selection. Because I activated so many different candidates, now I have to select one or two of them which are more probable. So what happens is sorting starts to occur through the activated word form, and these word form representations that are best matches to the auditory input. Suppose I am saying ka, you will probably expect car or cup or those kind of things as compared to king or queen or something like that. So the idea is, as soon as my the input is unfolding in time, your selection process is also unfolding in time, selecting best matches and kicking off the worst matches. So selection depends upon the bottom up stimulus, because speech is something that is unfolding in time. It's not really as a visual representation all put together at once. It is something that is incrementally unfolding. So selection depends upon the bottom up stimulus, because bottom up information is responsible in activating different word candidates. Also, in case of ambiguous bottom up information, context also might play an important role. As I was saying, if I am suppose in in a car, or I was talking about some conversation about traveling from one place to other, you will probably take ka as I was talking about, as that I am going to talk about a car or something else. So context also plays a bit of a role here. So we've talked about activation, we've talked about selection. Then what you have to do is you have to integrate whatever is getting activated with the previous conversation. So let us see how it happens. Features of the selected words are incorporated into the evolving, because this is unfolding in time, evolving representations of the entire utterance. What have I been speaking before speaking this word? And you will try and match this different candidates and see their fit towards the entire sentence, and that is something that will kind of help you really select the correct word. Properties of these selected word candidates and syntactic and semantic are evaluated according to the context, and this will basically help you select the correct candidate. Now lexical access, basically as per the cohort model, it basically results from the continuous evaluation of the similarity between the auditory input and the activated word candidates, the stored word representations, and this one is highly incremental, because again speech nature is highly incremental, and word form representations get activated as soon as the initial sounds come. Okay, so as soon as I am saying ka, everything related with ka kind of get activated. As I move to the next sound, then some of them are left out, and as I move to the second sound or the third sound, most of them are there. By the time I finish speaking, just one candidate is going to be automatically selected. Now in the cohort model, what is referred to as the cohort? Cohort is basically all of those candidates that are getting activated. The group of highly activated word candidates is referred to as cohort. Suppose if I am saying ka, cap and cat and candle and cattle are all getting activated, and this is basically going to form the cohort of my spoken word activation. Continuous evaluation of this incoming auditory input against this members of this cohort is going to happen, and this is going to lead to the elimination of all the non-matching or less matching candidates until the target word, the exact word that I am speaking, is really achieved. Cohort says word recognition depends upon reducing the set of these activated members to just reaching the one which matches the acoustic input. So the recognition point, there is talk of a recognition. Suppose I am saying trespassing. As soon as I have reached to say tree is getting activated, triangle is getting activated, but as soon as I move forward, I move to tre, then there is little activation. Then as soon as I move to tres, then there is only one or two words that are there, and trespassing, it basically gets selected. Word recognition then in this case has to be contingent upon two things. First is positive evidence for the presence of the target word that I am looking for, and input basically has to rule out the presence of other words. So the context and the features should actually try and help me rule out all the other possible candidates. So this is how the cohort model works. And again, there is evidence, experimental evidence in the favor of this as well. So they did this experiment, and the experiment was a priming experiment, and they had primes like captain and captive, and they had visual probes. They had an early visual probe or a late visual probe. So early, they were something like there was a picture of a ship, and later there was a picture of something else. And the idea was target words were basically related to semantically related to one of the two. There was a picture of a ship and a guard, and I was going to say capped. As soon as I would have shown capped and the picture is of a ship, you would assume that this is captain. As soon as I am saying capped and the picture is of a prison or a guard, then you will probably assume captive. And this is what was observed. Early in the word, when the visual input was there, both ship and guard were primed, because capped and early, if you see ship or guard, you are not really sure of either is going to be captain or captive. But later, when you show the visual thing, then only one of the things, that is ship, was primed. So because if you wait till the end, that is the one candidate that is active for most of the time. So this is again some experimental evidence in favor of how the cohort model really works. So now let us move towards word meaning. We've talked about how form is used to activate, to achieve lexical access. Let us talk a little bit about word meaning. How is the form going to be connected to meaning? So one of the ways is to just by introspection, you think that okay, this is the word form, and you think back and you see that this is how the meaning is connected. So you have a mental representation of meaning, and this meaning, the mental representation could be analogous to dictionary-like things. Suppose you have apple, red, fruit, sweet, etc., etc. In meaning, there could be two kinds of things. There could be either types like fruit, animal, etc. are types, or it could be tokens like apple, grapes, mango is tokens of the type fruit. Dog, kitten, kangaroo is basically tokens of the type animal. So either you could have types or tokens, those kind of things. Also, one of the things is how do you represent types in the brain? Again, I'm kind of now referring back to the lecture we've had on knowledge. So how do you represent types? You can either have definitions. So bachelor is definition of human, adult, male, married. But there's also another, it's slightly difficult to find everything that is fitting with this definition. Okay, so suppose for example you're talking about a monk. A monk is also human, adult, male, unmarried, but a monk is rarely referred to as a bachelor. So definitions are slightly hard to really play with. So sometimes these things do not really match, but again there are different ways. We've talked about this in the lectures on knowledge about how different kind of approaches really work. So another way could be the semantic networks way. We've talked about semantic networks, Collins and Quillen, Collins and Loftus earlier, so I'm just very briefly going to refer to them here and then move on. So semantic network theory basically explains that word meanings are encoded in a mental lexicon to explain the patterns of behavior that people show when they are encountering these words. So word meaning is represented by a set of nodes and links. Nodes are these specific concepts, and links are properties and things like has, is, those kind of things. Again, this is just an example of a semantic network. You have nodes in animal, mammal, bear, cat, whale, fish, those kind of things, and then you have links like representations which are mammal is an animal, or fish is an animal, fish lives in water, cat has fur, those kind of things. This is how they believe that representation of meaning is made in the brain. We've talked about this in much detail in the lecture on knowledge, so I'm not really going to elaborate on this here. Another very interesting approach to meaning is the embodied semantics approach. The embodied semantics approach basically says that words can carry meaning because they are tied to perceptual representations. One of the basic things here is the Chinese room problem, and Searle pointed this out, is that if a symbol describes something only in terms of symbols, then you have what is referred to as a grounding problem. If you ask me what is an apple, I'll tell you apple is a red fruit. Again, I'm not really pointing you out to actual apple. So if I'm kind of just moving in this word of symbols, I'll not really be able to make enough meaning. But I make meaning of apple because apple is tied to the representation, the perceptual representation of that red fruit, that it is red in color, is round in shape, it is sweet in taste. So the idea is that embodied semantics says the representations are symbols or words are tied to these perceptual representations, and these representations are built using our senses. So we make word meaning from the fact that these words kind of invoke the perceptual representations, simulate those perceptual representations, and this is how by invoking those perceptual experiences we actually make meaning. So if I am saying frog, and one of the hypotheses was the indexical hypothesis, it says if I am saying frog, I am kind of talking about what a frog looks like, what is the actual object. So I am just kind of elaborating this. The indexical hypothesis says there are three aspects: indexing, affordances, and meshing. Indexing is that if I am saying frog, there must be a real object out there in the world called frog, and I should index the word frog with that actual object. I should have analog representations, things like collection of perceptual features, green in color, particular in shape, and those kind of things. Then I should have some affordance, I should have some knowledge of how to interact with this. So I should know this is an amphibian, very difficult to catch, those kind of things. And then I should be able to match these two things. I should be able to know that this is the shape of this thing, and this lives in water, and these are the different features. Suppose unless I have all three of these factors, I will not really be able to make meaning out of this. Simply I can take another example. If I am talking about chair. Now chair is something that has particular properties which allow you to sit. So you can refer to so many things as chairs, anything that you can sit. You have to also link the aspect of affordance there, that anything that allows to sit can be referred to a chair loosely, and then with a mixture of these two things you will now be able to understand what the meaning of the term chair is. Now these are some of the approaches that have been used to explain how meaning is made. Again, I have not been very exhaustive and I have not really gone into a lot of detail about these things, but this is just in a very brief highlight of how word meanings are made. So I think that's all from my side in today's lecture. I'll talk about sentences in the next section.